Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Hegerle. I'm the Acting Deputy Director of the Office of Electric Reliability. Welcome to the Commission's annual Reliability Technical Conference. The purpose of this conference is to discuss policy issues related to reliability and security of the bulk power system. Before turning it over to Chairman Phillips, I would like to outline a few logistics for us. We'll have two panels this morning and slightly into this afternoon with a 10-minute break in between, and the conference will end at 12:45. The conference is open to the general public and is being webcast and transcribed. Only the commissioners, panelists, and a small group of commission staff will have the ability to speak today. Members of the public are invited to observe, which includes attending, listening, taking notes, but it does not include participating in the meeting or addressing the commission. Actions that purposely interfere or attempt to interfere with the commencement or conducting of the meeting or inhibit the audience's ability to observe or listen to the meeting are not permitted. This includes attempts by the audience members to address the commission while the meeting is in progress. Any persons engaging in such behavior will be asked to leave the building, and anyone who refuses to leave voluntarily will be escorted from the building. Additionally, documents presented to the commissioners and staff during the meeting will not become part of the official record of any commission proceeding, nor will they require any further action by the commission. If you wish to comment in this proceeding, and we would like you to, you may do so in docket number AD 24-10, or please visit our website for additional information. Also, we have representatives from our Office of Public Participation. They're located just outside of this room. So if you have any inquiries on that, please talk with them. They're very helpful. So today we do not intend to discuss the specific details of any pending contested proceeding before the commission, and we ask that all participants similarly refrain from such discussion. If anyone engages in these kinds of discussions, my colleague from the Office of General Counsel will interrupt the discussion to ask the speaker to move on to a different topic. Given the packed agenda we have today, panelists will not be providing opening statements, but will each briefly introduce themselves. And with these initial matters out of the way, I'll turn it over to Chairman Phillips.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome to everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Reliability Technical Conference. I in particular want to thank all of the staff and all the hard work that has gone to pulling this conference together. And I want to thank all the panelists for appearing here today, and I look forward to the discussions that we will have. Before we start, I also want to say a word about the horrific hurricanes that have gone through the southeastern United States over the past few weeks. Our hearts go out. It is heartbreaking, the devastation that we've seen in certain parts of our country. And we are thinking about people who've lost their homes, their businesses, and indeed some people who have lost family members as well. In that same vein, I want to give a huge thank you to all the utility crews who are out. Some of them still out right now, have been working for 2 weeks straight, some of these folks, to maintain and restore power to our customers. And so I want you to know, I want them to know that we thank them and that we're thinking about the work that they're doing. As I've stated before, reliability remains job number one. During my time as chairman and over the past 2 years, we have focused on several key issues such as protecting the grid from cyber and physical security threats, preparing for extreme weather, and addressing the changing resource mix. The Commission uses a twofold approach to address reliability. It employs traditional mandatory reliability standards, and we also work with our states and our other stakeholders and utilities on best practices. Our first panel this morning will explore the current state of the bulk power system. The transformation of the bulk power system is resulting in significant changes to the nation's power supply. These changes include increased penetrations of inverter-based resources, the increasing importance of natural gas generating units for system balancing, and the participation of distributed energy resources. The Commission approved new reliability standards for inverter-based resources to make sure promising new clean energy technologies can enhance and not weaken the reliability of the grid. This past March, the Commission established a federal-state current issues collaborative to explore cross-jurisdictional issues relevant to FERC and state utility commissions. The first public meeting of the collaborative will take place on November 12th, and the first topic of the collaborative will discuss gas-electric coordination. As to security, last month, the Commission issued a proposed rule to close supply chain cyber risk management gaps. FERC also issued a separate proposed rule to approve, with modifications, a SIP reliability standard that requires internal network security monitoring inside and outside an entity's electronic security perimeter. Because cybersecurity vulnerabilities, risk, and threats are a national security issue, it is imperative that our collective response be nimble and swift. Lastly, but certainly not least, extreme weather events continue to challenge our system. As we all know, winter is just around the corner. Regulatory action, collaboration, and consensus are essential to assure that our nation's grid can be prepared reliably now and in the long term. Our second panel will discuss challenges for system operators to maintain resource adequacy going forward. The retirement of existing generating resources, the addition of significant volumes of variable energy resources, the rapid anticipated electric load growth present challenges for our system operators to maintain resource adequacy. I should note that on November 1, we have scheduled a technical conference to explore emerging issues of co-location and other approaches to serve large loads like data centers. Today, again, I look forward to hearing from all of our panelists on these issues. And without further ado, I will turn to my colleagues, starting with Commissioner Christie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, let me echo your remarks about expressing admiration for the utility crews that have been out after the past two hurricanes, working to get power restored. I think they've done a heroic job. And I want to particularly single out Florida. I read an article today that the Florida utilities had restored 4 million customers since last week's hurricane. I think that's an incredible job. So kudos to all the Florida utilities who, for that kind of restoration that quickly. But also kudos to all the utility crews, as the chairman said, in other states like North Carolina and my state of Virginia have had the outages from the storm. So a lot of admiration for those utility crews out there working 24/7, night and day, to get the power restored. The topic of today could not be more important, and that's reliability. But its reliability also includes affordability, and they both are intertwined. I've said now for 3 years this country is heading towards a reliability crisis, and that's not a term I use for melodrama, but because I think that's what the facts show we're heading towards. It's driven by three main issues. There's regional differences. Goodness knows there are regional differences. I see Commissioner French sitting out there. He has a great statement about SPP and how they do things. So there are regional differences. Obviously, there are RTO versus non-RTO differences, but there are three main reasons, I think, that are driving us to this reliability crisis. First and foremost, we are seeing a rapid, unsustainable, dangerous loss of dispatchable generating resources, predominantly coal and gas. They're retiring far too quickly for reliability. Secondly, we have an inability to build and construct and bring online equivalent capacity resources. It takes 7 years from start to finish, on average now, to build a combined cycle gas unit online. And just to give you one example, in PJM, Mr. Khan mentions in his statement that PJM is facing a capacity shortfall by 2030. That's only 6 years away. That ain't far away. If you started a new combined cycle generating plant in PJM today, you couldn't finish in the 7 years. So the inability to bring on equivalent capacity is equally a problem with the rapid loss of the capacity that we have. And of course, the third reason is the increase in demand. After 20 years of essentially flat load growth, we're seeing skyrocketing demand, largely brought on by data centers, especially AI-enabled data centers. So this is basic economics. When you have supply down, demand up, prices rise. That's Econ 101. And we saw it in PJM, which is close to my heart and close to my monthly power bill as a Virginia ratepayer in Dominion. What happened in PJM at the last capacity auction? capacity costs in the PJM capacity market at the last auction went from $2 billion in the previous BRA to 15. That's a 7x increase in capacity cost. And it's driven by PJM's rapid loss of capacity, of dispatchable resources that are simply not bidding in anymore. So this is a problem we face. There are a lot of regional differences. Again, there are different solutions for different regions that we can look at, but those three reasons, I think, are what's driving our reliability crisis. And so I really look forward to hearing perspectives today from the various speakers. You've all had good statements, and I look forward to hearing it. But this crisis is coming fast. I mean, as I often like to say, you can put off reality for a while, but reality will track you down, and reality is tracking us down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosner.
Thank you, Chairman Phillips, for convening this conference, and thank you, staff, for putting it together. It was a heavy lift, given the size of the binder. Thank you to the panelists for being here today, and especially for lending your expertise to the Commission. Many of the people here in this room play key roles in maintaining the reliable operation of our country's electric grid, and for that important work, thank you. A few brief observations, because my colleagues have covered a lot of ground already. First and foremost, I'm here to learn so that the Commission can fulfill its most important duty, which is ensuring the reliable operation of the bulk electric system. Reliability has been incredibly busy and dynamic space in the past decade. Dozens of new and revised standards, some still underway. Many key assessments and reports have provided us with the information we need to act on the evolving reliability challenges. Taking a step back, today I see reliability as change management. Changes in generation mix, dramatic changes in demand, evolving threats from weather events, physical and cyber risks, and the inability to build on timelines that are consistent with these other drivers are all driving the need for careful assessment of grid reliability. And I'm both incredibly concerned, particularly with the pace of change on the supply side of the equation, the interdependencies between the electric system and other sectors, and also the decline in fuel diversity that has served as a critical bulwark against the weather threats of the past. But also, I'm incredibly but cautiously optimistic about the solutions side of the equation that is emerging. So I look forward to the panels today so that the Commission is equipped with the best information from the experts on the ground. And I look forward to working with my colleagues here on the Commission, at NERC, at the regional entities, and in partnership with industry to ensure a reliable grid. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also to all of our staff who did such incredible work putting this together. Thank you to the panelists for all of your expertise and the time that you all are giving to help us inform this conversation. I think one of the benefits of being one of the newer commissioners is that many of my colleagues have covered much of the needed ground for an important topic like this, and I think that's especially helpful today when we only have a couple of hours for such an important conversation, so I will keep this brief. We all know the many difficult, concerning, and complex problems that face us when it comes to the reliability space. Certainly, we're seeing all of the threats from extreme weather events, and I want to echo everything that my colleagues have said about how our hearts go out to those who have been affected by the devastation from Helene and Milton in recent weeks, and our incredible thanks to everyone who is spending so much time around the clock to bring relief. So a lot of thanks there and so much sympathy. We're also seeing so many of these changes, and I share the concerns that my colleagues have mentioned. We are in an area where we're seeing rapidly evolving threats in terms of both supply and demand. There's not much more, I think, to be said there, except I know there is so much more that you all will be adding in terms of context. I'm also deeply concerned by the pace of retirements and also the challenges we're seeing getting new sources online and through our interconnection queues. I'm concerned about the challenges we have with demand, both distributed demand when it comes to electrification and also intensely localized demand from data centers, and also the challenges that come with where that's going to be focused and how much we're going to see and when that's going to happen. There are so many question marks here. So we have real problems. But I'm also coming to this with a listening ear. From my perspective here, of course, I'm eager to hear your perspectives on what FERC specifically and the federal government can be doing. But I'm also very encouraged that we have so many experts at different inflection points in the system who are here to share their perspective. I'm hoping that we can learn from you all what you are seeing success, what you all and we all individually in our own roles can be doing more and better. And I'm hopeful that this conversation as well will inform the discussions that we can be working well together for the particular roles that each one of us play. So thank you again, and I'm really eager for this conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Chang.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Sharing the sentiments of other commissioners, my heart definitely goes out to all the folks that have to experience the horrible events in the Southeast, and of course all the utility workers, including the ones that are not from the regions and lending their help to the region. And this is so important in what we're talking about today, because one thing I know for certain is all the companies represented in this room and outside this room in the utility space, we all want the same thing. We actually want reliable service, and we know how devastating it is when a severe storm or any other events that cause outages in our system. So with that, I join my colleagues to really welcome the esteemed panelists here today, and I'm here also to listen. Of course, ensuring grid reliability is one of the Commission's core responsibilities, and recognizing that we cannot do this alone, we want you and want to hear from you and want to collaborate and coordinate across the industry between governments and private sector. As we already said often and repeatedly, that given ongoing changes to the grid, as well as cyber and physical threats, the Commission is actively engaged with the grid operators and planners to ensure that we identify and address these risks. With that, I want to acknowledge also many of the panelists and your representative organizations and your sister organizations have been working really hard at identifying and analyzing the problems we see that we just talked about here, and try to find efficient solutions. And I'm, super excited, and thank you so much for the staff that have really at FERC have gathered the people who are coming in here today and the pre-filed statements. You're working really hard in identifying, analyzing the problem and trying to find the solutions. And I'm very encouraged by some of the initiatives that have been identified in your pre-filed statements and that your organization is engaged in to advance the grid operators and really the stakeholders' understanding of some of these risks and how we are going to address them. So I'm particularly interested in, there are many, many topics, as you heard us all talk about it, but I'm particularly interested in how each region is working on the gas and electric coordination issue, identifying the risks that we face when those linkages are not working at their best, and how those risks are exacerbated by severe weather events that we just witnessed, but also in repeat storms across different parts of our country. Several of you mentioned that this has been a 20-year ongoing problem that requires incremental solutions. So I'm very interested in how you think FERC, both using its authority and its convening power to do and improve the situation. What's also increasingly clear to me is that in this foreseeable future, the grid really needs all hands on deck approach, and maximizing the use of existing infrastructure and resources, of course, while we continue to interconnect new resources and ensuring transmission infrastructure is needed to reliably serve the public. I want to make sure that one critical resource is also on the table, which is demand flexibility. And I know the chair talks a lot about demand flexibility, both in here and outside in public. It's also a part of this discussion and our ongoing effort. So what tools and guidance do we need to activate more load flexibility at this juncture where we're really tight on supply and demand, and with facing high capacity and or energy prices? How powerful would that be if we can just have the right tools and policies in place to activate these resources and relieve some of the pressure on our supply and demand fundamentals? So those are some of the things that I will be looking for. For panel one, I'd love to hear more about the innovative ways that each region is engaged in, and I know some of the pre-filed comments are us, so I'm gonna really be listening for those. And then for panel two, as Chair French said it best in SPP and other regions, I need to quote this because it was like, it's summarized so nicely. Demand is escalating at the same time that RTOs are increasing reserve margins, modifying resource accreditation methodologies, and integrating new resource types and technologies, and managing delayed generator interconnection processes. So any one of those is already a huge effort. So I just want to thank all of you for the work that you do every day, in addition to coming here and sharing your experiences. And I'm looking forward to really hearing about how you think we can help and how we can collaborate with all of your organizations, and especially NERC, how we can work together to increase the reliability of our system. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Chang, and thank you to all my colleagues for the thoughtful comments. We're going to go straight into our panel now. To begin our first panel, we will have a presentation by Jim Robb, President and CEO of NERC. Jim.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Good morning. I'll just say that I know the time is precious, so I'll dispense with the normal pleasantries, but I do want to echo the sentiments of all of your opening statements, particularly around the those suffering from the devastation of the hurricanes in the southeast. But I would like to get right to the point. We have a very simple math problem. The trend lines for electricity supply and demand are moving in the wrong direction to sustain reliability. Second, replacement generation lacks the abundant reliability characteristics of the retiring resources, and as we've seen over the past few years, weather conditions the system operates under are increasingly severe. Whether they're long duration, wide area, extreme cold or heat events, space weather driving GMD events, as we've had 2 this summer, or tropical systems like the devastating hurricanes of Helene and Milton. I'll come back and touch on the actions that we're taking to support the ongoing reliability of the power system, but I think it's appropriate to pause and celebrate what's working well right now. The state of reliability remains a great story of progress, set within a plot line that's growing more turbulent with these new and emerging risks. By many metrics, the electric transmission grid is highly reliable and resilient and has grown more so. Trends include a general decline in equipment failures, improved human performance, better situational awareness, and effective vegetation management. The good spinach, if you will, of effective utility operations. As a result, the severity and duration of outages are declining, and system restoration times are shortening. That's exactly what NERC and the regional entities were originally set up to accomplish through Section 215, mitigating the risks associated with the 2003 Northeast blackout. However, the energy transformation is leading to a new and vastly different electric system. We're losing traditional generation that makes electricity the old-fashioned way, by boiling water and making magnets spin, and replacing it with inverter-based variable generation, which interconnects through microprocessor-based power electronics with vastly different reliability characteristics. We're increasingly dependent on natural gas as the fuel to keep the lights on, and it has its own set of well-documented performance challenges, particularly under extreme cold conditions. And demand growth from electrification of transportation and buildings, industrial repatriation, and the massive appetite of data centers shows that we are in a new electricity era. The energy transformation requires a corresponding evolution in our approach. And so what does that mean for NERC and the regional entities and at some level for FERC? I'd like to focus on 3 areas of initiative. The first is what we're doing to streamline our approach to standards development. Second, what we're doing around modernizing our reliability assessment approach. And then third, focusing on external engagement to inform industry and policymakers of growing reliability challenges. So first, on standards and registration, the absolute core of what the ERO was set up to accomplish. We all know that the reliable modeling and integration of IBRs, inverter-based resources, is among the highest priority challenges. Earlier this year, NERC revised and the Commission approved registration changes to cover IBR resources that can have a material impact on reliability because of their common mode failure characteristic. In accordance with FERC directives, NERC has several reliability standards projects underway to address pressing reliability challenges associated with IBR growth. The path to success has required focused commitment by NERC's board and staff. To drive the needed enhancements, our board used a long-standing but never before used authority to streamline the standards development process with meaningful industry engagement. And while not everybody applauded the board's action in August, it worked. And the board last week accepted the Phase 2 IBR performance requirements, which we'll be filing with FERC here shortly. And hopefully we'll get commission approval, and we're on to the next set of requirements. Throughout this experience, we identified 2 factors in the CMEP approach in particular that may impede standards development and merit reflection. The first is that we, NERC, FERC, and the regions spend considerable time on fundamentally low-risk violations. Over 85% of the violations we process are identified as presenting low risk to reliability, but they still require significant review and assessment. However, that review results in fewer than 0.5% of them actually being recharacterized. So it's time for us to more fully embed a risk-based approach and move to a fundamentally different model of oversight for these low-risk violations. Second, industry's demand for precision and perfection in standards is understandable, yet the time taken to achieve that perfection misses an opportunity to effectively maximize risk reduction. We believe we could take substantial risk off the table, if you will, if we could adopt a more flexible approach to compliance monitoring and enforcement in the early stages of compliance monitoring for complex and novel standards. Coupled with the feedback loop, we believe we could stop letting perfect be the enemy of the good, get industry support for needed requirements more quickly, and adjust based on field auditing experience, much as we are doing with the SIP 14 physical security standard. We're really pleased with the receptivity that we're getting from FERC's OER to streamlining the way we collectively provide oversight. We believe changes in this area will help speed industry's acceptance of needed requirements and help keep pace with these evolving changes. Next, we're in the process of recrafting our approach to the reliability assessments, which have been featured so prominently in these and other forums, recognizing that our traditional capacity-based resource adequacy assessments are increasingly incomplete and likely understate the risk to reliable energy delivery. While we build the tools to more fully identify the risk of energy shortfalls, challenges associated with variable generation and natural gas interdependence, and the need to preserve needed levels of frequency response, voltage support, and dispatchability, we'll continue to use scenarios to lay out risk. But these changes will help inform the needs and requirements for new standards like the one we are working on for energy assurance and extreme weather planning and operations. We're also in the process of completing the interregional transmission capability study that was mandated to us by Congress last year. The ITCS will provide meaningful information to inform transmission and energy needs by identifying prudent system additions to strengthen reliability. Going forward, we believe that this capability will allow us to strengthen our independent reliability assessment capability, providing greater insights into energy sufficiency risk. Finally, we, NERC and the regional entities, are dramatically expanding our efforts to external engagement, to bring new players into our ecosystem, as well as informing policymakers across the continent on issues as we see them from our independent and objective perch. It's very clear that the risks are migrating from the strike zone of our traditional work with utilities to new players such as equipment OEMs, aggregators, technology providers, load developers, and in general to the generation sector and fuel suppliers. And while many of these players may never have a set of NERC requirements to comply with, they increasingly shape the risk environment and the profile of our sector, and they need to be engaged to help us carry out our mission. The regional entities have and will continue to step up their outreach efforts with state and provincial policymakers, and we at NERC are increasingly active with national forums of state and provincial regulators and policymakers to help inform policy choices. And of course, we also invest substantial time at the federal level with the same objective, to provide and offer our independent reliability expertise. So among those challenges, I do want to conclude with a few notes of optimism. First, I think we have collectively succeeded in getting real attention to the challenges associated with the increasing reliance on natural gas, and we are seeing a series of efforts to address at least some of the challenges that were uncovered during our joint work on Uri and Elliott. Multiple collaborative efforts have been prompted action on a suite of recommendations for improving gas-electric coordination and to improve supply reliability during extreme cold events. We're very encouraged by these efforts, and we hope that they continue. And they've largely been initiated by industry and by the trade associations. And while we should celebrate this progress, I think we also need to keep sober and understand that there's probably a lot more work that needs to be done. Second, the emergence of data centers and their very large loads has catalyzed a discussion around the future of nuclear power, with a potentially game-changing focus. And whether it's the restart of dormant plants such as Palisades or 3 Mile Island, speeding the development and deployment of SMRs, or potentially future large-scale reactors and ultimately fusion technology, this is a very exciting development for clean, reliable, and dispatchable electricity, provided that safety and fuel management concerns can be appropriately addressed. And finally, I have to say, through my discussions with C-suite executives across the sector, there remains a real commitment to reliability, balanced with the affordability and environmental sustainability concerns we've all recognized. Personally, I believe we can make material progress against all 3 legs of the energy policy stool if we can stay focused on what's important, keeping balance in our priorities and developing the right set of tools to meet the challenges of climate change while redeveloping a reliable and affordable electric system. And with that, I look forward to the conference today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Robb. I know that we're not going to have opening statements from all of the panelists today, but I do want to give you a brief opportunity to state your name and where you're from. Start with Carrie.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. It's red. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. It's an honor to be here. My name is Carrie Zalewski. I am the Vice President of Markets and Transmission at the American Clean Power Association. And very quickly, we represent 800 members of diverse technologies, wind, utility scale, solar, storage, transmission, clean hydrogen, and we place reliability as a top priority. I also would like to note that before this, I was the chair of the Illinois Commerce Commission, and I lived through Winter Storm Uri and Elliott, and will always place reliability and cost at a highest priority. So I bring that experience as well. But thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Todd Ramey. I'm Senior Vice President of Markets and Digital Strategy for the Midcontinent ISO. I've been with MISO for over 20 years now and held various leadership positions. In fact, when I joined the company, it was pre-market operations, it was even just before we started our reliability day one type operations. So for the past 20 years, I've been working with our membership and our local and state regulators developing MISO's processes, mostly focused around market design, market administration, and power system operations. Today, I'm overseeing our traditional IT and digital technology teams, our security teams, as well as our market design teams. So I appreciate the opportunity to be before the Commission today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Doug Brown. I'm the Vice President of GridSME, SME being subject matter experts, and my company provides support, compliance support, and reliability support to those new and some existing clients in the renewable energy space, particularly solar and battery energy storage. Our clients are not your typical vertically integrated companies for the most part. These are folks that got into the energy industry because of enticements for financial gain to develop solar and battery energy storage plants. And we provide expertise in setting up generation and operating generation. My background is that I began in the oil and natural gas industry in the 80s, and I've seen a lot of changes through that I also see going on now. I worked for the Department of Energy for 28 years in a variety of roles having to do with communications, SCADA development. My last position there was the supervisor over transmission and generation in the Upper Great Plains region, which is Montana, North and South Dakota, parts of Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. During all of the time that standards were being developed, I was part of that process, and when I retired from DOE, I went to work for WEC, so I've been part of the regulatory process there. I'm delighted to be here and appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Randy Howard. I'm the General Manager at Northern California Power Agency, and today, in addition to representing Northern California Power Agency, I'm representing the American Public Power Association on behalf of the 2,000 or so public power entities. For public power, as you know, our focus is on customers in our communities that rely on us to keep the lights on and the bills affordable. I'll also be giving some comments. I co-chair the Wildfire Working Group for the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, and so I'll be providing some comments related to that activity as well.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Stephen George. I'm a director in the System Operations and Market Administration Group at ISO New England. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning talking about all these very relevant and interesting topics that we've spent a lot of time discussing with some of you over the past few years. So thanks again, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you all. Thank you again for being here. I want to jump right in, and I'll start with you, Jim. And this is a question for everybody. I like the way you frame the discussion, Jim. We know that we have, and everybody's talked about this, we have a lot of load coming on, unexpected load in places, material. We know we have retirements at record paces going on at the same time. Here's a question. What, if anything, should we be doing to slow retirements of generation resources on our system? And is our planning tools, are they aligned properly to make sure that we bring on new generation to meet the need? Mr. Robb.
Well, that's like going straight to the heart of the matter, right? Because, when you find yourself in a hole and you want to get out of it, the first thing to do is stop digging. And I will say, I do not know exactly what the Commission's role can be around the preservation of existing generation, because so many of those decisions are driven by state policy, not federal. Although federal policy is clearly a threat to at least to the coal fleet with the emerging carbon restrictions. I do believe that support for RMR and other type arrangements to preserve the life of necessary assets is going to be high on the Commission's agenda as we go forward. We're probably going to see more and more of those needs. I think the more pressing issue from my perspective, in addition to stop digging, is the issue that Commissioner Christie put on the table, which is how do we speed the development of new resources? That gets into the strike zone of planning and siting and permitting. And that entire soup, I think, needs to be rethought in this country if we're going to develop the kind of infrastructure that we're going to need, whether it be gas, electric, generation, transmission, to come even have a fighting chance to keep up with the pace of change that we're seeing on the load front. A data center can be built in 2 to 3 years, power plant 6 to 7 years, transmission line 15 to 20 years, right? Those are the realistic time frames that we have to deal with. We need to shorten the development of infrastructure in a way that at least starts to come close to matching the development of new load coming on the system.
Start with Mr. George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll address your question by talking a little bit about the topic that's near and dear to our hearts in New England, and that's energy adequacy. I think that, to your point, retirements pose a risk to energy adequacy, and that risk varies in different regions of the country. And of course, in New England, we have a long history of thinking about energy adequacy. We understand what that risk looks like today. We know that risk today comes about in long stretches of cold weather where we deplete our stored fuels, LNG and fuel oil, rapidly. But what we need to do is understand how that risk evolves over time as the resource mix changes, as the loads increase due to electrification, and as we think about retirement. So that's what we've done in New England, is really take a first step at developing the tools to understand what that risk looks like over time. And along those lines, we've spent a lot of time working with EPRI over the past 3 years to build that framework to facilitate our understanding. And we support the efforts that are underway in NERC and have been underway for a period of time in developing standards that are going to require everyone to do these types of assessments so that they can better understand the risk. And then once you have the tools to understand what the risk looks like, and we can sort of converge on common methods for evaluating that risk across the interconnection, we can have a sense for how our neighbor's risk impacts our risk. And that sort of goes into, as Robb mentioned earlier, that the study that's underway at NERC, the Interregional Transfer Capability Study, which is going to help us understand how much can we count on our neighbors, given that when it's cold in New England, it's cold in New York, it's cold in Quebec. What sort of assumptions should we be making in terms of how much can we rely on our neighbors, and how does that feed into our thinking about the risk as it evolves over time? And I'll end with one additional piece that we think is important in terms of energy adequacy, and that's developing standards or thresholds for energy adequacy. There's been a couple recent reports that have come out, one from NERC, excuse me, and the National Academy of Engineers, another report from ESIG that have sort of highlighted the importance of complementing the long-standing 1 in 10 resource adequacy criteria with some energy adequacy focused metrics that capture tail risks, while also, to Commissioner Christie's point, evaluating the cost benefit of solutions to those low probability risks. So and let me just, if I can close with this, just saying that in New England, we're in the process of doing this through our development of what we're calling the Regional Energy Shortfall Threshold, which will effectively define the region's risk tolerance for energy shortfall. And I think once you have the tools, the methods, and the standards or thresholds in place, you can really start to have a good conversation about how that risk evolves over time and how we should be thinking about retirements of generation.
Thank you, Mr. George, for the thoughtful answer. I'm going to go to Mr. Howard and shift gears quickly. You can address the first question, sir.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So several things immediately come to mind. Obviously, I'm in Northern California. We're at the forefront of some of the energy transition and the resource transition in California. A number of my member utilities are currently at zero emissions on an annualized basis for their resource mix. But with that comes our natural gas fleet, very efficient fleet, but the capacity factors continue to decline. We continue to use it less, depending on whether we have a good hydro year or not so good hydro year. And so keeping these facilities economic and being able to pay, you still have to have the same amount of staff, whether you're using it 50% of the time during the year or 30% of the time. So the cost numbers are there. And so the economics of keeping those facilities online becomes challenging. And so there are things that I think FERC could do related to that. The other issue that wasn't really mentioned here, but when we talk extreme weather events, when we were discussing, closing of gas and coal type facilities, our other big issue that we've been having a lot of discussion on that I think FERC has an opportunity to assist the electric sector is related to our hydroelectric dams. Hydroelectric systems represent, I think, only about 6% of the markets out there capacity. But we're continuing to see in the West, we're seeing related to our wildfires and our watersheds, we're seeing the hillsides come down after a wildfire. It's coming in behind our dams. It's causing issues with storage capacity. It's causing issues related to dam safety. And now we met with a group from that was impacted by Hurricane Helene, and they're seeing the same related to the flooding. You talk TVA, you talk Duke, huge amounts of silt and debris came behind those facilities, and that has to be removed. We have to remove that in order to get our capacity again behind it. And so things we can do related to FERC licensing and getting the approvals so we can get that out. In some cases in the West, it's taking us 6 to 8 years to get the permitting associated with removal of that silt and debris. And we need to do much better because these weather events are becoming more extreme.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Howard. Sure. Thank you for bringing hydro into discussion in particular. I just spent some time in Alaska speaking with the National Hydro Association, the importance of the cliff that we have. We know we have a lot of relicensing that has to happen in the next 10 years. So we're on it. Thank you for raising the issue. I want to shift gears a little bit. While I have you here, I'm going to turn to Carrie for a second. One of the things I hear all the time, and FERC is resource neutral, right? But I hear folks say that the wind doesn't blow 24/7 and the sun doesn't shine 24/7. So it's almost like a dismissal of the value of those resources onto the grid. I just want to know, how do you respond to that?
Thank you, Chairman. It's a great question. And I'll even use a term that I hear you say a lot about this all of the above approach. And I absolutely agree. It's diversity. I think that resource diversity is the linchpin of reliability. There are high penetrations, particularly in markets like CAISO and ERCOT, higher and higher penetrations of clean energy. And when I say clean energy, I'm meaning renewables plus storage. And what we're seeing in result of this higher penetration is the ability to meet new and more extreme weather events and higher peak loads for sustained levels. There was a really interesting report that came out of CAISO where BESS resources were noted to be the critical factor that allowed for the grid to stay active during prolonged high temperatures. And so this is a really important data point that we can use. And we're seeing the same thing happen in markets like ERCOT, where we're seeing new peak loads that we've never seen before. Meanwhile, they have a higher percentage of clean energy. Now, no resource is immune to risks or weaknesses, whether it's weather dependency or limited energy availability or correlated system outages. We talked a little bit about that already this morning, or insufficient fuel supply or environmental limitations. It's dangerous to run a grid that focuses on one type of resource alone. We saw that. We have all kinds of facts that came out of Winter Storm Elliott about the over-reliance on a resource that was a central cause to the disruption. With the gas production deficit during that event, no amount of incremental gas fire generation would have been able to support additional reliability.
Thank you. I think my time is up now. One of the things, if I have more time, Mr. Robb, I want to talk to you about the streamlining processes that you've laid out. And some people would argue that what we've done is what's gotten us here. So what has changed? Why change now? I want to have that conversation, but I want to also let my colleague, Commissioner Christie, ask this question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on the excellent question that you asked of Mr. Robb. Basically, we're seeing this rapid, unsustainable loss of dispatchable resources, premature retirements. What do we do now at the federal level, particularly? Some are driven by state policies. You alluded to it, but one thing I think you probably would agree, you probably wouldn't say it, but the best thing the federal government could do right now is if EPA withdrew its power plant rule, which is going to have a devastating impact on grid reliability. It's going to accelerate these retirements and make it impossible to build new combined cycle gas to run as baseload. But let me ask you about the RTOs in particular. Do you think it's time to look at go into the market designs of the market, those RTOs that are using markets to achieve resource adequacy? I mean, I'm not going to talk about non-RTOs. We have them next panel because they're basically vertically integrated IRP states. But do you think it's time to look at the markets and how they're affecting these retirements and losses of dispatchable resources? Would you think that's what we need to be doing? Because that is under federal jurisdiction.
That's a great question, Commissioner. And while we don't have authority over market design and market related matters, we do see that there is an increasing challenge associated with markets providing adequate compensation for needed reliability investments. We hear that all the time through our standards process. For example, one of the big objections to and challenges we had to work through with the winterization requirements was there's no path to cost recovery. No clear path to cost recovery for the merchant generators. One of the issues we uncovered during Winter Storm Elliott was the fact that, most Winter Storm Elliott, Winter Storm Uri, most generators don't have firm power supply because it's not, or firm fuel supply because it's not compensated for in the markets. I understand why the generators take that posture. I would probably do the same thing if I were in their shoes. But I do think, particularly with these winter events where we know every year we're going to have 5 to 10 days that's going to be stressful. Some way of figuring out how do we deal with those 5 to 10 days, right, for the benefit of society that's going to be impacted as a result of those events, without destroying all the great things that markets have developed for us. I think it's a hard problem, but I think it's a problem worth taking on. And I think it's at the heart of market design for the RTOs as to how they're kind of creating through their rules and their financial incentives something equivalent to the utility obligation to serve, which went away when we went to the market design. So I think that's a very important topic to burn some brain cells on and for some action to be taken against.
Commissioner Ross.
Thank you, Chairman. Great, interesting discussion here. I have a two-part question. One for the folks from the ISOs. The question I have is only recently we've seen dramatic changes in price in some of the markets that the Commission oversees. We've seen in one region, I think, a 9x increase in the price. And so we're coming off this long period of time where the markets were reflecting low prices, and we were seeing a lot of exit. And so my question for you is, this is a new thing, I think, and what do you see as a result of that signal that these markets are just starting to send? In some places it's been sending it for a little bit of time, but others it's more recent. We've also made dramatic changes to those markets in terms of how we value the contribution of resources to resource adequacy. So question for you is, we're starting to reflect scarcity. Do you see a response, or are there other things the Commission should be thinking about? And then my other question is in a completely different direction, and because we have Robb here, I just have to ask, what are your early lessons learned from your study of interregional transmission? And what are you seeing about how that can be a solution to some of the reliability challenges? And also, how would you put that in the context of also the need to have generation on those wires? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Mr. Commissioner. Question about markets and their role in supporting resource adequacy planning at the RTO. MISO has had a resource adequacy construct for our region for over a decade. It's probably the market design historically that has had the least performance in producing quality efficient outcomes, largely due to some design choices that we've made over the years, primarily working with our state regulators and their preferences at the time. What you can find out is if you're running a market-based process and you're producing prices, those prices will create incentives, even if they're disincentives. So part of our design and price formation of our annual capacity construct produce prices through a vertical demand curve that, as you mentioned, were very low when you're in a planning reserve surplus, prices clearing near zero. Commissioner Christie made the comment earlier that PJM is forecasting current trends that they're on. They could be short of planning reserves by 2030. MISO hit minimum planning reserves in 2022. So we cleared, going from zero when we had surplus with a vertical demand curve, we cleared that market at Cone for part of our footprint 2 years ago. We also had that result for part of our footprint this year. So back to the question earlier about the role in delaying retirements. We've been working since 2020 to slow down the pace of retirements with MISO, with our states, with our members. That has actually caused us to kind of bounce at minimum planning reserve capacity requirements for the last couple of years, delaying and slowing down retirements without removing some other pressures that are causing continued choices to retire certain resources. We're going to continue to see a degradation in resource adequacy in the MISO region. Prices play a role. Historically, RTOs are running markets that are covering 1 year in duration. We found that in our footprint, with the changing dynamics of retiring dispatchable resources, additions of weather-dependent resources, the dynamics and modeling changes associated with that evolving fleet, looking at 1 year for the footprint has not been sufficient. We're currently working with membership to produce what we hope to be an annual process. We're producing a 20-year resource adequacy outlook. The out years not being market-based processes, but indicative information of where the region is heading, given the member plans and the state plans around resource adequacy. So the RTOs will continue to play a key role in resource adequacy planning. It's still primarily the responsibility of our state regulators, and we work closely with them to make sure that the plans within their states are aggregated up in MISO across our 15 states can give projections for the region on what they can expect for their plans in a larger RTO context. So going out from 1 year to 4 years, going from annual looks to seasonal looks, capturing those wintertime concerns that are emerging are all part of what we're working on to make the RTO a relevant player in helping us maintain adequacy given we're at minimums. Not even considering load growth that's approaching, it's going to be even more challenging.
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Rosner. I think, as you know, in New England, we're in the midst of rethinking about the capacity market, shifting from what it's been for a number of years in a 3-year forward capacity market to the current proposal, which is effectively a seasonal prompt market, which also, at the same time, we're looking to better reflect the characteristics of the new types of resources through capacity accreditation reforms. So significant effort underway that's going to take several years to come to conclusion. So probably a little premature to speculate on how that impacts the clearing prices in the market, but we're certainly thinking that it's a step in the right direction given the changing resource mix, and also being able to better reflect the differences between winter risk and summer risk in that capacity market. I think the other important thing, and I touched on it earlier, is the way we're thinking about this in New England is to consider supplementing the capacity market with some additional energy adequacy based metrics through what we're working on called the REST, something additional to capture those low probability extreme weather risks that maybe aren't entirely reflected in the capacity market. So between the reforms we're doing to the capacity market, the incorporation of additional metrics, and even beyond the capacity market, I think it's incumbent on us as the ISO to define the types of reliability needs we have, and then go out in the market, whether it's through existing products or new products, to get that service, the reliability service that we need. So I would expect to see us continue down that path in the years to come.
So I'll give you some of the high-level conclusions coming out of the ITCS. I will say at the beginning it turned out to be a much bigger beast than we realized when we read the legislation. But with the help of industry stakeholders and a fairly concerted effort at NERC with the regional entities, I think we're working our way through this, and you'll get the official version in a couple months. But you alluded to one of the most important conclusions, which is transfer capacity is informed by transmission capacity. Transmission capacity does not equal transfer capacity because the resources that are available to be transported are very, very important. There's not a single number that defines transfer capacity. It changes with the configuration of the system and with loads. Very pronounced seasonal difference, very wide variation across the country. Some areas may have as low as 1 or 2% transfer capability, in other areas as high as 92%. So it's a very hard problem to try to describe uniformly. What is clear, though, is as you project out to 2033-34, which is the year that we chose to do the assessment around, there are areas of the country that would benefit from additional transmission and transfer capacity being developed, and it's a fairly sizable number, around 30 to 35 gigawatts of new transmission could be prudent through the lens that we looked at this through, which was largely how do you optimize reserves across the system. It's similar to what you would do with a market dispatch model, except we're not looking at cost, we're looking at reserves. What is problematic or challenging about that is much of that opportunity is between established interconnections. So between the eastern and western interconnection, between those two interconnections in ERCOT, and between the Quebec interconnection and the rest of Canada. So there are reasons why those interconnections were developed as separate interconnections, both from a reliability and a security perspective. So they need to be tested through that lens as well. I think it's important to note that what we did was an assessment of transfer capability, not a transmission plan. there's a lot of work yet to be done to figure out which of these projects in the corridors that we've identified as having opportunity should move forward, because there are many other aspects of this than just optimizing reserves. The other major insight as you look forward from here to 2033, looking at existing resource plans, even with the transmission build out that would be implied by the assessment, we are still short generation. Right, there are parts of the country that you cannot solve. So at the end of the day, while a lot of people would like to say we can solve this problem through transmission, we can solve this problem through batteries, we can solve this problem through this, at the end of the day, we need generation in this country. And by the way, we did that assessment based on last year's load growth outlook associated from our LTRA. When we re-pour that this year, the growth outlook is certainly going to be much higher because of the data center load that's come into focus in the last year. And the reserve base is probably going to be lower because of the retirements, the incremental retirements that we're going to see. So that gap that I mentioned around kind of resources in the country is only going to grow as we make these analyses more contemporary. Hopefully that gives you a lens into where we're coming out.
Thank you.
Mr. Z.
Thank you all. I really appreciate this conversation. I think a lot of these issues, particularly market design, they're really important pieces of the puzzle, and I really appreciate your insights there. This may perhaps be shifting the panel in a slightly different direction, although perhaps not. We've been talking about a lot of big problems and big solutions, and I think that's really important for what we're talking about today. But I'm also wondering what sort of things do you see where there might be perhaps smaller lift solutions that might have an outsized effect on some of the issues we're talking about? They advance the ball, maybe not as far as they want, but when in the quest for a larger solution, we might be overlooking them. And I'll say the reason this might shift in a different direction is, Jim, your comments, and I think Todd, you mentioned in your comments as well, talked a little bit about changing the way that we talk about tracking and responding to lower level events from a compliance perspective. And I would imagine there's more you could say there about what in your view are we losing in terms of where we could be spending this time and resources elsewhere. So this is an invitation to switch to more the cybersecurity and asset security side, but also even in the resource adequacy. I'd be interested in your thoughts on smaller lift solutions that we might be looking at as well as part of this broader conversation.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner C. There's a couple of things that we can do, and the first, I'm looking at this on a timeline. Mr. Robb indicated that when you're in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. And with regard to the retirement of coal-fired plants, I believe that the Commission has an opportunity to weigh in on that. It's not a regional, it's not a statewide concern. It falls under Interstate Commerce Commission, in my opinion, and I believe that better studies need to happen. And the reason that I say that is that I talk to planners all the time, and they say that their models are not good because they don't have complete data, and we're about to make that worse. And that's why I think this is on a short timeline. The way it's going to be made worse is that we're used to working in an environment where we have vertically integrated companies, and we all knew each other. We knew who to contact to get the data, and now we're driving a lot of change in the industry by regulatory requirements to companies that built their plan without having those burdens. So by adding burdens, we will drive change in ownership of plants, and the continuity of the people to contact is at risk. And I believe that NERC and the regions can support that, but a transmission planner has to have the data from the plant, and if they don't have accurate data, they need to know who to get it from. And that's at risk right now. And it's at greater risk as more of these requirements become applicable to the GO-IBR sub 75 MVA power plants. So I would urge the Commission to do a couple of things there. One is to reactivate the role of the reliability assurer that was described in the FERC functional model up until version 5.1 2019. I would refer you to that there needs to be somebody looking at solving these big problems and urging the slow of these coal-fired plants, and in putting up databases where the regions can provide continuity between the planters and the generator owners that has to be maintained even though those plants are sold. With regard to cybersecurity, we're about to drive a lot of change there because generator owners have been operating in this sub-regulatory environment, and now they're being required to register. And one day a plant that didn't have any regulatory, or a control center didn't have any regulatory requirement, is going to be at a medium impact cybersecurity level. And right now they've been operating securely through the cloud, but that's going to change because you can't be compliant with the current versions or the versions that are being discussed with the SIP medium impact level of compliance. Those plants don't have the expertise, or those control centers don't have the expertise to manage that transition. They are secure and they are reliable using Amazon services, using Microsoft services, but that change is going to force them to have on-premises systems that are not maintained by people with the expertise that's required from somebody like Amazon or Microsoft. And I know I've hit many topics there, but I think each of those has an important role to play, and I'd be happy to discuss further any of them. Thank you.
I think that's a great question, because I think one of the things that is tyrannical about the electric system is that it's so large that if we only look for terawatt solutions, we're going to miss a lot of good things along the way. I did a couple things on the assets front, and I can come back and talk about the process issues if you'd like. But on the asset front, I think we got to step back and celebrate what batteries have done for the system right now, particularly in California and particularly in Texas. A battery combined with a solar plant on a hot, sunny day does wonders for being able to meet summer peak loads. That's the way we got through heat domes in the south last summer. And the previous year when we had some really traumatic weather in California around Labor Day, hot weather, the batteries that was the big difference between September 2022 and August 2020 when we had to shed load, with the amount of batteries and solar that were added. So that's terrific, and I think we should celebrate that. And even though they're only 4-hour batteries, usually operating for a couple hours a day, they're making a real difference for meeting those summer peaks. So that's a great thing. Now, they're not as great in the winter, right, for a bunch of obvious reasons. There's not as much sunlight, and the loads are shifting to different times of the day. But as a summer resource, batteries and solar panels are making a huge impact. The second thing is, I think there is a real opportunity. I do not know how big it is, but Commissioner Chang, you mentioned this. How can we take advantage of all of the intelligence that we're building into the system, the communication capabilities that we have to enable smarter load management, and make changes on the demand of the system, particularly in those times when the system's stressed. I think that's going to be a really big deal as we roll out particularly electric vehicle charging. And making sure that we're charging cars at the time when power is abundant and not putting incremental stress on the system when it's not. So I think there's a lot of wood that can be chopped in that area. In terms of the cyber and physical risks of the system, I take Doug's point. The one issue that I'm most concerned about is whether we have the appropriate physical and cyber protections on what we call low impact assets. And that may not need to be solved through a NERC standard, but that's an area of real concern. We saw the Moore County attacks a couple years ago, and while they did not create the evil 3 that SIP 14 was designed to protect against, 40,000 people were without power for 2 or 3 days during a very cold period of time. We should figure out a way what the prudent way to protect those assets are. When the Solar Winds event happened in 2020, really changed our calculus on a coordinated attack through the cyber vector, right? Because we always thought of it as a one-to-one problem where an adversary had to pick off a bunch of individual assets. But what we learned is if they can corrupt a commonly used platform, right, we have a systemic problem. Right, and that could affect a lot of assets. So those are the two issues that we struggle with. Right, is what's the prudent level of protection for the low impact stuff, recognizing that you can't protect everything the way you're going to protect the SIP-14 assets, there has to be something we can do to improve the security of those facilities, and that weighs on me a lot as to how we do that.
I'm going to add something a little different. So from our perspective as load-serving entities, we're ready to build. We have projects. We're ready to go. Obviously, queuing is a very big part of that need and getting those interconnections. So at least in the California space, we're very pleased to see the new interconnection process at the CalISO, where for the first time, and I think across the nation, the load-serving entities now have a priority in the queuing process to ensure that the right resources are coming on in the right locations. We have a say in that process by the allocation of the points, and I think that's a model that really needs to be looked at broader across the country to kind of get through some of this queuing and make sure we're getting some of the right types of resources on. But we're ready to build now to add some of those resources. Our other big issue that hasn't really been discussed much is related to these extreme natural disasters is building new transmission. Right now, many of us are unable to get insurance. And if you're unable to get insurance, you're unable to get financing. And it's a big issue for us. And it's not just wildfires anymore, but it's a number of these extreme natural disaster events. So we need to look, at least as a country, how we're going to solve some of these issues, because we have transmission lines that we'd like to build today, and we're looking to build for some of the offshore wind in California. We can't get insurance to cover those lines, and you can't get then the financing necessary to build them. So it's a very significant issue because we know we have a lot of transmission to build, and so we have to kind of figure that one out, how we're going to deal with liability, because and on the wildfire risk, many utilities are one wildfire away from bankruptcy. They really are.
Can I add on? It is a great question. Time is of the essence. And Jim already mentioned how long all these things take, like how long it takes to build transmission, interconnection issues. The recent queued up report shows that only about 20% in certain regions of the applications that go into the queue are actually ever built and energized. I mean, these are real problems, and thank you to the Commission for their leadership on Order 2023. And then the additional conversation with the further efficiencies, that was a really important conversation. It's kind of going to echo what Jim said, but I want to go a little bit deeper on some of the points he made about market structures and market signals that can be sent. He actually mentioned ERCOT and CAISO. We spent a lot of time looking there as well. They have a lot of storage going online. ERCOT, from our estimation, has about 9.2 gigawatts, and CAISO has about 11.2 gigawatts. Really interesting and exciting, but there's some really interesting differences as well. When we looked a little bit further about the type of storage and the type of duration, the average duration in ERCOT was about 1 hour, and the average duration in CAISO was about 4 hours. And that's because of regulatory structures and signals that are sent. I'm not suggesting it's not an apples to apples. They are very different markets with different constructs. So I'm not saying one will work in the other. But in CAISO, there are payments for resource adequacy with an ELCC class of 4 hours. And so that is what the developers are building. And there's developers that are building in both markets, but they're building to what the market signal is sending. So if there's a signal that you want for a 6 hour, a 7 hour, a 10 hour, a multi-day, these technologies exist, but the signal needs to be there. Another point about Jim, yes, it is exciting when you pair storage with solar, but I think there's a lot to be done on hybrid resources. Even with like storage and gas. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting ways that we can attract a lot of these hybrid situations. So I think there's a market signal that could be really helpful there as well.
Commissioner Chang.
Thank you. I have two questions semi-related to each other. So I hear from you, we need, load is growing, we need to build generation, of course, that's sort of the traditional supply and demand balance. I also hear about severe weather events or severe extreme natural disaster events. And so I'm shifting away a little bit from the sort of the building and to meet the load, but shifting a little bit to the extreme events. And in my mind, many of the things you talked about, storage, transmission, gas generators, they're, to me, insurance products, right? Insurance for those events. And some of our markets are not yet designed to recognize and pay for those insurance that we need. And we all know insurance because we don't really like paying for it, but then when something happens, you're really glad you have it. So my question is, what are the regions doing to think about it in this insurance way, whether they're market approaches or other approaches? Because I'm asked by state entities saying, well, is markets really the only solution, or are the states now responsible for these insurance? Because, you know, when the lights are about to go out, the person that really cares and worries about that is the local folks, right? So they want to be able to provide that insurance. So what are the regions doing about that? And then what can FERC do specifically? What can FERC do to either urge or require to kind of help us get to that point where we understand there is this risk and we need an insurance to cover that risk, and who's actually paying for that insurance? Thanks.
Thanks for the question. I might jump in here, give some perspective on the MISO experience with your question. So the MISO region is largely made up of traditionally regulated load servers. And on top of that, we've got an RTO that runs a market-based process for resource adequacy. We found that it's not either or. Those processes need to be designed and work well together. So in the example that I gave earlier, MISO might have a RTO process that produces inefficiently low price signals for capacity. We've experienced over a period of time, even regulated entities respond to that inefficient price and may not invest in additional resources. So you may get a steeper decline in planning reserves than you otherwise might hope for. So we believe that those processes need to be designed to be compatible. Over the last several years, we've had good experience really closely partnering with our organization in MISO states and their leadership to make sure that these processes at the RTO level are supporting and giving information to the entities that currently have the responsibility for ensuring adequacy for their regions. Today, in our footprint, it's largely the states and the load servers themselves. So it's not an either or, they have to work well together. I mentioned earlier, we're moving at the RTO beyond just the 1 year resource adequacy construct where we say, here's the answer for this year. We're really getting engaged in providing multi-year forward looks on the plans that our states and our LSEs have today. When you add those up, here's what the picture looks like for a 15-state region over the next 20 years. And currently, the outlook does not look great, right? So the point of doing that is saying, here's where we're headed as a region based on your individual plans within your states or within your LSE regions, with the expected impact being that you'll start to see those longer term plans adjust as we continually provide that information. So partnering together, making sure the RTOs, processes, and information incentives align and support the needs of those in the region, whoever they are, that have the ultimate responsibility for ensuring adequate planning for their regions.
So much of our electrical grid infrastructure wasn't built or designed for some of the extreme weather events that we're seeing today, whether it's wind loading or other types of events that we're seeing. And so you're seeing a lot of pressure on the rates that you're being asked to approve because there's a lot of capital dollars going into rebuilding a lot of that infrastructure, hardening that infrastructure to be more to be able to withstand and mitigate some of those risks going forward. And I think you're going to continue seeing that. The challenge is, again, on the affordability to the ratepayer. You know, if we're putting a lot of money in that infrastructure, it's really challenging for us to put a lot of money into the transition into other additional resources as well, right? I mean, if we have to do it all in the wires business or a lot of our capital dollars, it's very challenging. And I think you're going to continue to see a lot of that pressure in the tariffs that everyone's going to be seeking or needs in order to do all those things simultaneously. And so that's where I think we need a little better balance of speed and urgency but recognizing that we have a lot of work to do on our infrastructure to keep it reliable, and that's just going to take a lot of our capital dollars.
Thanks for the question. I appreciate the way you framed it up as insurance, and I'll be brief. I think, in New England we've had a number of insurance products against winter energy risk over a number of years, and we have one more year on our inventoried energy program, or IEP, and then we have an important conversation next year in the region about, okay, now what, in terms of that program specifically. But I think longer term, and I keep going back to what we've done in New England, but I think it's a good model to follow. What we're doing now is establishing the threshold for risk in the region and getting everybody to the table and saying, okay, how much risk are we willing to take, and then how much insurance do we need to buy when the risk exceeds that threshold. So that's, eventually we'll get to the solution phase for determining what types of solutions should be considered if we find ourselves in a condition where the risk is beyond what we're willing to accept. And I think, that's when we'll get into discussions, though it's hard to avoid them now. We'll get into discussions about market-based approaches, infrastructure solutions, demand-based solutions, which you mentioned earlier. Which of those, or which combination of those things is most effective at cost-effectively mitigating that extreme weather risk. So that's what we've done in New England, and I think I would just encourage FERC and NERC to encourage other areas of the country to follow that same path, because the risk is different in different areas of the country, and I think it's up to each region to have that conversation and define exactly what that threshold should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have about a minute and a half. I want to quickly address the question I teed up, Jim. You mentioned earlier that low-risk compliance issues, that they're taking too long. It's taking years. It's impacting the efficiency of your organization. Tell me, how can FERC help?
So, first of all, we've been on a journey, right? We started off with that we're going to audit everything and very little tolerance for any exceptions to meeting the standards, to a more risk-based approach to how we do that. And we had to earn our stripes, right? We operate through a federated model that's complicated, and we all wanted to make sure we were treating everybody more or less the same as we kind of work around the country. We've been now at this for about 5 years, right? We went back and we took a look at what we're processing and so forth. A couple things to keep in mind: over 80% of violations are self-reported, right? Entities have developed controls to figure out, where they're out of compliance. They report them to us. Most of these we dispose of as a find, fix, and track, right? We just fix it and tell us that you've done it and assure us that you've done it. We'll check on that later, or a compliance exception. But we had to earn our stripes, right? That we had to satisfy ourselves that the regions were doing that well, and FERC had to satisfy itself that we're doing that well. I think the track record suggests that we are. So I think we could move to a more statistical sampling. Maybe let's look at 1 in 10, right? And then maybe we go to 1 in 25, right? If that feels good. Whatever it takes, 'cause I think we want to have the assurance that all the right things are happening out on the grid. That's why we created the standards in the first place. But the burden here isn't just on us and on OER. It's also a burden for the entities, right? Because they have to respond to data requests. They carry these violations on their books. They have to report them to their boards, all this kind of stuff for a protracted period of time, right? So that naturally impedes their appetite for more requirements, right? So as we start working on new standards and so forth, right, we get this demand for perfection because they want to know very specifically how they're going to be able to comply. And that's where I think both of these, I think, help. One, let's clear out the administrative burden associated with the low risk stuff. Take a different approach to how we, particularly for new and novel standards and requirements, as long as they're making a good faith effort to comply, right, but maybe miss the mark, right, but tried, right, we should treat that differently, right, and particularly with some of the early implementation. And I think we take a lot of risk off the table very quickly, and get perfection in the next round.
I can tell you, having worked on these issues on the NERC side, on the utility side, and now on this side, there's a lot of wisdom in what you say, Mr. Robb. Thank you. Same with all of our witnesses. We thank you so much for coming today. Appreciate the discussion. Mr. Hegerle, are we still good with the 10-minute break right now? Okay, I'm going to give everyone till 11:41. Be back in your seat. Thank you.